They called the schoolmarm crazy for offering cash to a struggling cowboy. Turns out they were wrong. The town was not much more than a cluster of wooden buildings, a general store, a tiny post office, and a one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town. In that schoolhouse taught Miss Clara Benson, the schoolmarm who had arrived in the town 5 years earlier. She was young, with a kind face framed by neatly pinned hair, and she carried herself with a quiet determination that made her stand out among the townsfolk. She cared deeply for her students and often went out of her way to ensure they learned not only their reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also values like honesty, compassion, and perseverance. Clara's days were long but fulfilling. She woke before sunrise to prepare lessons, swept the floors of her classroom, and made sure each child had the attention they needed. She was strict when necessary but always fair, and the children respected her for it. Yet outside the school, life in the town could be harsh, especially for families who worked the land or herded cattle. Money was always tight, and most people simply did what they could to survive. One such person was a young cowboy named Eli Parker. Eli had come to the town a few years earlier, taking odd jobs wherever he could find them. He worked for ranchers, helped herd cattle, repaired fences, and sometimes drove deliveries between nearby towns. Despite his tireless work, he often found himself short of money. Broken equipment, unpaid bills, and unexpected expenses always seemed to follow him. He was proud and independent, never one to ask for help, and he carried a quiet determination to make his life work on his own. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he often found himself exhausted and frustrated by the constant struggle. Miss Clara had noticed Eli long before the rest of the town did. She often saw him riding through the dusty streets early in the morning, hat pulled low over his eyes, shoulders hunched against the wind, or late at night, returning from a long day of work, worn and weary. There was something about him that spoke to her, a mixture of resilience and humility that she admired. She could see that he was good-hearted, honest, and determined, even if the world around him seemed to make things unnecessarily difficult. It happened on a crisp autumn morning when Clara was walking home from the market with a basket full of supplies. She saw Eli leaning against a fence outside the general store, his face drawn and tired. She had heard whispers from the store clerk about how Eli had been struggling to fix his broken wagon wheel, and that he might have to go without proper tools for the season. Seeing him like that, Clara felt a pang of concern. Something in her urged her to act, even if it went against what the townspeople might think. She approached him cautiously. "Morning, Eli," she said, her voice gentle. "You look tired. Everything all right?" Eli straightened slightly, tipping his hat in greeting. "Morning, Miss Benson. Just another long day, ma'am. I'm managing, don't you worry." Clara studied him for a moment. She knew the polite words hid the truth, the struggles he didn't want to show to anyone. Her mind raced as she considered the situation. Most people would never offer help, and even fewer would risk their reputation to assist a stranger. But Clara wasn't most people. She believed that sometimes a small act of kindness could make a big difference, even if others called it foolish. By the end of that day, Clara had made a decision. She would offer Eli some money to help him get through his difficulties. Not a large sum, just enough to repair his wagon and get some much-needed supplies. But the challenge wasn't in the offer itself. It was in how the town would react. People here were quick to judge, especially when it came to women stepping outside the roles they had been expected to play. A schoolmarm was supposed to teach children, maintain order, and perhaps knit a few sweaters for the winter. Offering money to a grown man, even out of kindness, was something entirely different. The next morning, Clara walked up to Eli as he was loading hay onto a wagon. She held a small envelope in her hand, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke with her usual calm confidence. "Eli, I know this may surprise you, but I want to help. Take this. It's just a little money to get your wagon fixed and to buy what you need." Eli froze. He stared at the envelope in her hand, then back at her face. I can't accept that, Miss Benson," he stammered, the pride in his voice battling with the exhaustion in his body. "I appreciate it, I do, but I don't want charity. I need to handle my own problems." Clara shook her head gently, her expression warm. "It's not charity, Eli. Think of it as a loan if that makes it easier. Or consider it a gesture from someone who believes in you. I've seen how hard you work and I know you'll use it wisely. No one else needs to know." "I just want to help." He hesitated, looking down at the dust-streaked ground. Pride warred with need. He had never been in this position before, someone offering help without strings attached, without expecting anything in return. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he took the envelope. "Thank you," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. I won't forget this, Miss Benson." Clara smiled, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew that what she had done might stir gossip and criticism, but she also knew it was the right thing. Her heart ached a little for the smallness of the town's expectations, but she refused to let that stop her. In her mind, helping someone who truly needed it was never foolish, no matter what others said. As she walked away, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances of townspeople watching from a distance. By the next day, whispers had begun to circulate. Some people laughed behind their hands, calling her crazy and wondering why she would involve herself in the life of a struggling cowboy. Others shook their heads, murmuring that she would learn a lesson about meddling in matters that weren't hers. Clara ignored the gossip, focusing instead on the knowledge that Eli had a chance now, a small spark of hope in a life that had been otherwise burdened by hardship. Despite the whispers, the children in her classroom noticed a change in her demeanor. She seemed lighter, more cheerful, as if she had accomplished something meaningful beyond the walls of the schoolhouse. They couldn't understand the full story, of course, but they sensed the quiet confidence in her actions. In those small moments, Clara felt the truth of her belief. Kindness was never wasted, even when others failed to see its value. For Eli, the envelope in his pocket represented more than money. It was proof that someone believed in him, that someone had noticed his hard work and cared enough to offer help without judgment. It stirred something inside him, a renewed determination to succeed, not just for himself, but to honor the faith someone had placed in him. As the days passed, both Clara and Eli adjusted to this new unspoken bond. They did not speak of it often, for both understood the delicate balance of pride and gratitude. Clara continued her work at the school, maintaining her reputation as a diligent and caring teacher. Eli continued to labor under the hot sun and across the chilly nights, but now with a glimmer of hope lighting his path. And though the town continued to whisper, calling her crazy for her unexpected generosity, Clara's heart remained steadfast. She knew that the true measure of an action lay not in the opinions of others, but in its impact on the lives it touched. That small envelope, humble as it was, held the promise of a brighter future for someone who had worked tirelessly and deserved a chance. Little did they all know, this single act of kindness, the decision to reach out, to help a struggling cowboy, would not only change Eli's life forever but would also challenge the narrow views of the townspeople. What they called crazy would soon be revealed as thoughtful, wise, and compassionate, a lesson in humanity that few would forget. And so, the story began, quietly and unassumingly, on the dusty streets of a small town, where a determined schoolmarm dared to see potential where others saw only struggle, and where a young cowboy learned that accepting help is sometimes the first step toward truly standing on your own. Eli Parker had always been a man of pride and independence. He grew up on the open plains, where a person learned quickly that life was hard, and no one could be relied upon but themselves. From the time he was old enough to hold a rope, he had been taught to work, to endure, and to find solutions to problems with his own hands. That was why the envelope from Miss Clara Benson had unsettled him. It was not the money itself. It was the fact that someone had noticed his struggle and cared enough to help him without expecting anything in return. At first, he tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and did his best to forget about it. He had a wagon to repair, fences to mend, and cattle to move. Every day brought a new challenge, and Eli had always met these challenges alone. But each time he reached for a tool or counted his remaining supplies, the envelope whispered to him, a quiet reminder that perhaps he didn't have to face every obstacle alone. Life as a cowboy was relentless. Dawn arrived while the stars were still fading, and Eli would rise before the sun to saddle his horse and check the cattle. Some days were blistering hot, forcing him to take long breaks to avoid exhaustion, while other days were bone-chilling cold, leaving him shivering as he worked. Even so, he never complained. The work had dignity, even if it was exhausting, and he believed that earning one's keep honestly was the measure of a person. Eli's wagon had been on the verge of collapse for months. The wooden wheels were warped, the metal rims rusted, and the boards were splintered from years of use. He had been patching it as best he could, but the repairs were temporary and always left him with nagging worry that the wagon might give out at the worst possible moment. Supplies were another worry. Feed for the horses, food for himself, tools and nails, all were scarce and expensive, and Eli had often gone to bed hungry rather than go into debt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eli sat on the porch of his small cabin, staring at the envelope in his hand. The town had quieted down, and the only sounds were the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional creak of a weathered fence post. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a life where the wagon was fixed, where he could work without fear of it breaking down, where he could breathe a little easier. Still, the pride in his chest refused to let him simply take the money and feel grateful. He remembered the words of his father, who had taught him that accepting help made a man weak. And yet he also remembered Miss Benson's calm eyes, the gentle way she had said, "I've seen how hard you work and I know you'll use it wisely." There had been no judgment, no lecture, no pity, only trust. That trust was heavier than any envelope, heavier than any coin. After much deliberation, Eli made a decision. He would accept the money, but not as charity. He would treat it as an investment, a tool to repair what was broken and to give him the chance to prove himself. The next morning, before the town had fully awakened, he took the envelope to the blacksmith. Sparks flew as he worked, metal clanging against metal, and Eli's focus never wavered. The wagon wheels were carefully repaired, reinforced where necessary, and oiled to ensure smooth movement. Boards were replaced, nails hammered in with precision, and the wagon once again looked capable of carrying the heavy loads of a cowboy's life. As he worked, Eli began to feel a subtle shift within himself. The envelope was no longer just paper and money, it was a symbol of possibility. For years, he had been surviving, barely keeping afloat, and now he had the chance to thrive. The work itself, which he had always seen as purely labor, began to feel like progress, a step toward something better. And each hammer strike and wheel adjustment reminded him of Miss Benson's quiet confidence in his abilities. But life on the plains was rarely simple. Even with the wagon repaired, Eli faced the same harsh conditions that had tested him for years. Weather could change in an instant, forcing him to shelter cattle or reroute his deliveries. Supplies could still run short, and unexpected expenses always had a way of appearing at the worst possible moments. Yet, with the small boost of support, he felt more capable of meeting these challenges head-on. He could plan, organize, and execute his work with more certainty than he ever had before. Despite the practical improvements, Eli's inner conflict persisted. Accepting help had challenged his beliefs about independence and pride. He found himself reflecting on the nature of strength. Was strength truly in enduring hardship alone, or was there a different kind of strength in recognizing when one needed assistance? Each day, as he worked harder and more efficiently with the repaired wagon, he began to realize that his own pride had been a barrier, not to success, but to growth. Accepting help did not make him weak. It had allowed him to achieve more than he could have alone. News of the repairs and Eli's improved work habits began to spread quietly through the town. Some townspeople noticed the repaired wagon and wondered how it had happened. Others noticed Eli's newfound efficiency and the ease with which he managed his tasks. Whispers circulated, not all unkind, and Eli found himself at the center of quiet speculation. Some assumed he had found new work or received an inheritance. No one guessed the quiet hand of Miss Benson and the small envelope that had quietly changed the course of his life. Meanwhile, Clara continued her teaching with the same dedication she always had, unaware that the town's whispers had reached Eli. She had no intention of seeking recognition. Her motivation had been purely the desire to help someone she believed in. Yet she couldn't help but notice subtle changes in the young cowboy whenever he passed by the schoolhouse. There was a new lightness in his step, a steadiness in his gaze, and a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Eli began to work longer hours with renewed purpose. The repaired wagon allowed him to transport more goods, make more deliveries, and take on slightly larger jobs than he could before. He still faced difficulties. Some days were unbearably long, and the work still demanded every ounce of strength he had. But now, each challenge was met with the knowledge that he had support, however quiet and unobtrusive it might have been. The envelope, tucked safely away in his pocket, was a reminder that someone believed in him, and that belief fueled a determination stronger than any exhaustion. He also began to notice small, unintended benefits of his improved circumstances. The horses were healthier, fed on proper grain rather than scraps. He had enough food to eat without constant worry, and he could even save a little money each week. For the first time in months, he could rest without anxiety gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. His pride remained intact, but it had evolved. He no longer saw acceptance of help as weakness, but as a tool to reach a goal he had always strived for: stability and self-sufficiency. As the days turned into weeks, Eli began to consider what he could do for the town and for those around him. The kindness that Clara had shown him sparked a desire to pay it forward in whatever ways he could. He helped neighbors with repairs, assisted other struggling workers, and quietly offered advice to those trying to make a living on the plains. The envelope had done more than repair a wagon. It had rekindled a sense of community, a sense of responsibility not just to himself, but to the people who shared his world. Eli's transformation was subtle but profound. His work became more precise, his movements more confident, and his outlook more optimistic. People in town noticed the change, though they did not yet know the reason behind it. Some whispered that he had finally found his footing. Others speculated that he had received an unexpected windfall. But Eli himself knew the truth, and that knowledge was enough. Through it all, he carried a quiet gratitude for Miss Benson. Though they spoke rarely outside of casual greetings, he understood that her belief in him had been the catalyst for this change. She had seen potential where others saw struggle, and in doing so, she had given him a chance not just to survive, but to thrive. The lessons he learned were deeper than anything he had learned on the plains. Lessons of trust, humility, and the profound impact of a small, thoughtful act. And so, Eli Parker continued his days as a cowboy, working tirelessly across the wide-open plains, yet with a newfound sense of hope and confidence. The envelope had changed the way he approached life, showing him that accepting help when needed was not a sign of weakness, but a step toward true independence. Each repaired wheel, each mended fence, Each successful delivery reminded him of the power of compassion and belief. By the time the first snow of winter dusted the town, Eli was not only surviving, he was steadily building a life of stability, honor, and quiet achievement. He had learned that strength was not measured by how little one asked for help, but by how one used the opportunities presented to them. And though he never forgot the struggle that had brought him here, he carried a new understanding that sometimes the kindness of another person could change not only your circumstances, but the very way you saw the world. Eli's journey was only beginning, but already it was clear that his life would never be the same. The envelope from Miss Clara Benson had been more than just money. It had been a key, opening doors he had thought forever closed. And as he looked out across the plains, the wind sweeping through the grass and the setting sun painting the sky, he felt a quiet determination to honor that gift with hard work, courage, and a heart ready to give back when the time came. The small town where Eli Parker and Miss Clara Benson lived was a place where news traveled fast, and gossip traveled even faster. People noticed things that might seem small to outsiders, the way someone walked, the repairs on a wagon, or a stranger's unexpected kindness. And when the townspeople began to notice changes in Eli, their curiosity quickly turned into speculation. It started with the repaired wagon. A few of the townsfolk saw Eli rolling down the main street, the wooden wheels strong and steady, the boards looking nearly new. Some of the men stopped in their tracks and muttered to each other. "Where did he get the money for that?" one asked, raising his eyebrows. "He never had that kind of coin before," replied another, shaking his head. Soon the rumor spread through the streets like wildfire, and soon everyone had an opinion. For most of the town, the idea that someone might help Eli Parker without expecting anything in return was hard to understand. People were accustomed to rules of reciprocity. If you helped someone, they owed you something. If someone received help, there was usually a price attached. That someone could act purely out of kindness, without strings or conditions, seemed impossible to them. And that someone was Miss Clara Benson. Whispers started circulating about the schoolmarm. "Did you hear about Miss Benson giving that cowboy money?" asked one woman at the general store, clutching her basket of flour. "I think she's lost her mind," replied another, shaking her head. "Who does that? A teacher giving cash to a grown man? It's scandalous." The words stung more for Clara than they could ever know, but she remained calm, refusing to engage in the gossip. She had never sought approval for her actions, and she had no intention of letting the opinions of others sway her sense of right and wrong. Meanwhile, Eli felt the weight of the town's scrutiny as well. Some men sneered when he walked past, muttering under their breath, "Spoiled by a woman, I'd say," or "He's getting soft." A few others expressed mild curiosity, wondering how he had suddenly found the resources to fix his wagon. Eli kept his head down, continuing his work with the same dedication he always had. He didn't want to draw attention to himself or to Miss Benson, but the eyes of the town were everywhere. The children at Clara's school were also aware of the gossip, though in a much gentler way. They noticed the small changes in their teacher, the faint smile when she spoke to them, the light in her eyes that seemed brighter than usual. They didn't know the story behind it, but they could sense that something good had happened. Clara continued to teach with her usual patience, never mentioning the envelope or the whispers, but the students felt a subtle sense of pride for their teacher. Some townspeople went further, questioning Clara's judgment. "Why would she interfere in a man's affairs?" asked one elderly woman while hanging laundry. "It's not her place to decide who gets help and who doesn't. She's a teacher, not a benefactor." Others were more direct, making pointed comments whenever Clara walked past. "Crazy as a fox," muttered a man at the saloon, smirking as if to say that she would soon learn her lesson. Clara heard the whispers but chose to rise above them. She believed that one should act based on conscience, not the expectations of others. The world was full of opinions, many of them loud and unkind, but she had learned that the truth of one's actions was not measured by how others responded. She continued her work, teaching, caring, and quietly supporting Eli in any way she could. Eli, on the other hand, had to deal with the direct consequences of the town's judgment. Some of the men tried to question him, asking pointedly, "You accepting charity now, Parker?" He simply replied with calm determination, refusing to justify his actions to those who did not understand. The whispers stung at first, but over time, he began to realize that their opinions had little power over his own path. What mattered was the work he was doing, and the new opportunities that had opened up because of the small act of kindness he had received. Despite the skepticism, some townsfolk began to notice the change in Eli's work and attitude. The repaired wagon allowed him to transport larger loads of goods efficiently, and he was completing tasks that had once seemed impossible. The horses were healthier, the fences stronger, and the cattle better cared for. Slowly, curiosity shifted from suspicion to admiration, though no one admitted it aloud. Clara remained a quiet observer of these changes. She saw Eli working with a new level of focus and pride, and she felt satisfaction in knowing that her small gesture had made a difference. She did not boast, nor did she try to seek recognition. Her reward was the knowledge that someone she believed in was thriving. She also knew that the journey was far from over. It would take time for the town to see the full impact of kindness, and to understand that true strength could coexist with support from others. The whispers, though initially sharp, began to soften as Eli's efforts became more visible. The men who had mocked him began to notice the precision in his work, the efficiency in his tasks, and the quiet pride he carried. The women who had questioned Clara's judgment observed the improvements in Eli's life and began to reconsider their opinions. Slowly, the town's perspective started to shift, even if the acknowledgement was quiet and hesitant. Eli, for his part, remained humble throughout. He never flaunted his success or boasted about the repairs. Instead, he focused on using the resources wisely, ensuring that every action he took would lead to greater stability and self-sufficiency. He began to realize that accepting help was not a weakness but a tool for growth, a way to reach goals that had previously seemed out of reach. The subtle change in the town's atmosphere was not immediate. Some people continued to gossip, and some held onto their skepticism. But others began to quietly admire the courage of Miss Benson, who had dared to act on compassion despite the judgment of her peers. They began to see that her crazy action had been thoughtful and deliberate, aimed at helping someone in need without expecting anything in return. Even as opinions shifted, the bond between Clara and Eli grew stronger, though unspoken. There was a mutual understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the small act of kindness had created a ripple effect in their lives. Clara continued to watch Eli from afar, proud of his progress, and Eli carried with him a sense of gratitude and determination that influenced every action he took. The town itself began to feel the subtle impact of this change. People observed that acts of kindness, when genuine, could produce results beyond what they had imagined. It was a lesson that some accepted slowly, while others resisted, clinging to old ideas about pride, independence, and the proper roles of men and women. Still, the seeds had been planted, and over time, those seeds would grow. For Eli, the gossip and skepticism were secondary to his work and his own understanding of his journey. He had faced hardship his entire life and had always found ways to endure. But now he recognized that endurance alone was not enough. Growth required insight, trust, and occasionally, the willingness to accept help. The envelope from Miss Benson had provided that insight, opening a path to improvement and self-reliance that had been previously obscured by stubborn pride and exhaustion. As weeks passed, the town began to notice a subtle transformation. Eli's work was more visible, his demeanor more confident, and the results of his labor unmistakable. Even those who had doubted him could not ignore the improvements. The repaired wagon became a symbol, not of charity, but of possibility, a tangible representation of what could happen when someone received support and used it wisely. Clara, ever patient and steady, continued her teaching and quietly observed the changes unfolding around her. She knew that the town would take time to fully understand, that whispers and skepticism would not vanish overnight. But she also knew that actions, no matter how small, had the power to shift hearts and minds in ways that gossip never could. And so the town remained a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and lingering skepticism. People talked, observed, and judged, but slowly, they began to see that what they had once called crazy was actually thoughtful, wise, and deeply compassionate. Miss Benson's courage had set in motion a transformation that extended beyond Eli Parker alone. It was a lesson in humanity, in kindness, and in the quiet power of doing what is right even when others doubt you. Through it all, Eli remained focused on his work, determined to honor the trust that had been placed in him. He repaired fences, cared for the cattle, and transported goods with renewed vigor. Each successful day reinforced the lesson he had learned. Accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but a step toward achieving something greater. The whispers of the town, once sharp and judgmental, began to fade, replaced by cautious respect. And though not everyone understood or approved, the actions of a kind-hearted schoolmarm and a determined cowboy were slowly beginning to change the way the town saw the world. The ripple of compassion had begun, and there was no turning back. With the repaired wagon and a renewed sense of purpose, Eli Parker's life began to change in ways he had only dared to imagine. The improvements in his work and equipment allowed him to accomplish more than he ever could before. Tasks that had once taken hours were completed efficiently, and the results of his labor were now visible to all who passed by his property or traveled the dusty roads of the town. The once struggling cowboy was no longer merely surviving, he was starting to thrive. The first and most immediate change was the condition of his wagon. No longer a creaking, fragile vehicle on the verge of collapse, it now carried heavy loads of hay, tools, and supplies with ease. Eli could make trips in fewer days, which meant he could take on more work, deliver goods more reliably, and earn a steadier income. He no longer had to choose between repairing the wagon and feeding himself. He could do both. The practical benefits were enormous, but the emotional impact was equally significant. Eli felt a renewed sense of control over his life. Where once he had been burdened by exhaustion and worry, he now found confidence and motivation. With each passing day, he pushed himself to do even more. He mended fences faster, rounded up cattle more efficiently, and even found time to assist other ranchers in the area. Word began to spread quietly through the town of Eli's diligence and capability. People who had once questioned his work ethic now began to admire his skill, noticing that he managed tasks with a level of care and precision that many others lacked. Even those who had initially mocked Miss Benson's generosity had to pause and reconsider. Perhaps there had been wisdom in her actions after all. The improved stability also allowed Eli to focus on long-term improvements. He began to organize his tools, repair broken equipment, and plan his work more carefully. With the pressure of immediate survival eased, he could think strategically, allowing him to increase productivity without overworking himself. He even started saving a small portion of his earnings, something he had never been able to do before. Each small step forward reinforced the sense of accomplishment he felt and encouraged him to continue improving. Beyond practical improvements, Eli experienced a deeper transformation in his attitude and outlook on life. The envelope from Miss Benson had not only provided a financial boost, it had inspired trust, confidence, and hope. He realized that accepting help was not a weakness, but a recognition of opportunity. That realization allowed him to see challenges in a new light. Problems that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared as obstacles that could be overcome with effort and careful planning. The gift of support had empowered him to embrace growth rather than simply endure hardship. Miss Benson continued her work at the schoolhouse, quietly observing Eli's progress from a distance. She remained modest about her role in his success, never seeking recognition or praise. But she could not help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction as she noticed the transformation in him. The once weary cowboy now moved with purpose and confidence. The changes in his work and demeanor reflected the impact of her faith in his abilities. Clara had always believed that small acts of kindness could create meaningful change, and now she was witnessing that truth in a tangible way. As Eli's life improved, so too did his relationships within the community. Neighbors who had been skeptical began to approach him with questions and requests for advice. He shared what he had learned, helping others improve their own work and manage their resources more effectively. His quiet generosity and willingness to assist others earned him respect, and slowly, the whispers that had once questioned his character began to shift toward admiration. The town began to see that he was not relying on charity, but was using the help he received to create a better life for himself, and, indirectly, for those around him. The financial stability also allowed Eli to make improvements to his living conditions. His small cabin, once drafty and poorly maintained, began to feel more like a home. He repaired the roof, reinforced the walls, and even added small comforts that he had long desired. With the stress of survival reduced, he could focus on creating a space where he could rest and recover fully each night. The changes were subtle but profound, improving his quality of life and providing a foundation for continued growth. Eli also began to develop a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. He reflected on Miss Benson's gesture and realized that it had sparked something important, a desire to give back. Though he did not yet have much to offer financially, he found ways to contribute to the community. He helped other struggling workers, assisted with repairs, and shared knowledge gained through experience. The envelope had not only changed his circumstances, it had awakened a sense of responsibility and generosity that would shape his character for years to come. The townspeople, slowly observing Eli's transformation, began to reconsider their earlier judgments of Miss Benson. The schoolmarm who had been called crazy for her act of kindness was starting to be seen in a new light. People realized that her judgment had been thoughtful and deliberate. She had identified someone in need, assessed their character, and offered support that enabled them to succeed on their own terms. The initial skepticism and criticism gave way to respect, and in some cases, admiration. One day, as Eli completed a particularly difficult task of moving a large herd of cattle across a muddy field, he paused to look back at the town. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the rooftops and the hills beyond. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that was not tied to exhaustion or necessity. He had worked hard, utilized the support he had received wisely, and created meaningful change in his own life. The transformation was both tangible and deeply personal. Clara, observing from her schoolhouse window, smiled quietly. She had acted with faith and kindness, without expectation of reward, and now she saw the results. The act that had been questioned and mocked was proving to be powerful and transformative. The ripple effects of her generosity were evident not only in Eli's life, but also in the slowly changing attitudes of the townspeople. Her courage to act compassionately, even in the face of criticism, was teaching an unspoken lesson about the impact of kindness and trust. Eli continued to grow, both in skill and confidence. His work became more efficient, his decisions more thoughtful, and his outlook brighter. The envelope from Miss Benson had been a catalyst, but it was his hard work, determination, and careful use of the support that truly made the difference. Each day brought progress, and each completed task reinforced the understanding that with the right tools and guidance, one could achieve far more than by struggling alone. As winter approached, the town witnessed the culmination of Eli's efforts. The repaired wagon, the well-cared-for animals, and the improvements to his property were visible symbols of his progress. Even those who had doubted him could not deny the change. The whispers of "crazy" directed at Miss Benson began to soften, replaced by murmurs of admiration for her wisdom and foresight. People began to understand that her generosity had been an investment in potential, not a foolish act of charity. Eli himself had learned a lesson that went beyond material improvement. He understood the power of belief and trust, the importance of seizing opportunities, and the strength that could be found in accepting help when it was offered wisely. The journey had been difficult, but the outcome was rewarding. He no longer saw assistance as a weakness but as a tool for growth and achievement. Through it all, the bond between Eli and Clara remained quiet but significant. Words were not necessary. There was mutual respect, understanding, and gratitude. She had believed in him when others had doubted, and he had risen to meet the opportunity she had provided. The act of kindness had not only changed Eli's life, but it also demonstrated a broader truth to the town. That compassion, wisdom, and courage could create results far beyond what gossip or skepticism could imagine. The story of Eli Parker's transformation began to serve as a subtle inspiration to the community. People began to recognize that small, thoughtful acts could have profound effects. Miss Benson's courage to act with kindness, despite criticism, became an example of integrity and humanity. The changes in Eli were proof that support, when given wisely, could empower individuals to realize their potential and contribute positively to the lives of others. By the end of the season, Eli had not only repaired his wagon and stabilized his work, but had also grown as a person. He had gained confidence, independence, and a renewed sense of purpose. The town could see the transformation, and slowly, its perception of Miss Benson shifted from doubt to respect. What had once seemed crazy was now recognized as a wise and compassionate decision, one that had created meaningful change in the life of a hardworking young cowboy and subtly transformed the community itself. The ripple effect of kindness, determination, and wise use of support was becoming clear. Eli's life had improved, the town's perception of generosity had evolved, and the quiet courage of Miss Benson had demonstrated that even in a world full of skepticism, one thoughtful act could create profound and lasting change. Winter had come to the small town, covering the hills and streets with a soft blanket of snow. The air was crisp, and the sun rose later and set earlier, painting the sky in muted shades of orange and pink. For many in the town, the cold season brought hardship, but for Eli Parker, it was a season of reflection and quiet triumph. His life, once dominated by struggle and worry, had transformed in ways that he was only beginning to fully appreciate. Eli's wagon was no longer a source of anxiety. It rolled steadily across the snowy roads, carrying hay, supplies, and tools efficiently. His work had become more organized and productive. He had repaired his fences, cared for his cattle with diligence, and even found time to assist neighbors who were struggling with similar challenges. Each day was a testament to his hard work, determination, and the small but pivotal support he had received from Miss Clara Benson. Despite the changes in his life, Eli remained humble. He never flaunted his success or boasted about the improvements he had made. To him, the real value lay in the work itself, and in the stability and independence it had afforded him. He continued to rise before dawn, saddle his horse, and tend to his duties, but now he did so with a sense of accomplishment and confidence that had been absent before. Where there had once been exhaustion and frustration, there was now pride and hope. The town, too, had begun to shift in its perception. What had once been whispers of skepticism and judgment about Miss Benson's crazy act of giving a struggling cowboy money had gradually transformed into quiet acknowledgement and respect. People noticed Eli's progress, the improvements in his work, and the subtle yet significant ways his life had changed. It became clear that the schoolmarm's generosity had not been a foolish impulse, but a thoughtful and deliberate act that empowered someone to achieve more than they could have alone. Some townsfolk began to approach Eli with curiosity and admiration. "I don't know how you managed this, Eli," said one rancher, shaking his head in amazement as he observed the repaired wagon and well-maintained cattle. "Whatever you did, it's working. You've turned things around." Eli merely smiled and nodded, saying nothing of the envelope or Miss Benson's quiet generosity. He knew that the respect he earned now was a result of his own hard work and careful use of the opportunity he had been given. Eli's progress also inspired others in the community. Young men and women who had been struggling to find their footing began to see that persistence, combined with smart use of resources and guidance, could lead to meaningful change. The town began to recognize the value of support and trust, understanding that sometimes a helping hand could unlock potential that might otherwise remain dormant. Miss Benson's courage to act with compassion had begun to ripple outward, influencing attitudes and perspectives beyond just Eli's life. As winter deepened, Eli finally decided it was time to publicly acknowledge the role Miss Benson had played in his journey. He had always carried a sense of gratitude in his heart, but now he wanted to ensure that the town also recognized the wisdom and kindness behind her actions. One cold morning, he walked to the schoolhouse, the snow crunching under his boots. The children greeted him warmly, their eyes curious as he approached, but his focus was on Miss Benson. "Miss Benson," he began, his voice steady but sincere, "I want to thank you for what you did. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me a chance, and I've done my best to make the most of it. I couldn't have done this without you." Clara smiled warmly, a hint of pride in her eyes. She had never sought recognition, but hearing these words from Eli reaffirmed her belief in the power of kindness and trust. "You earned it, Eli," she replied gently. "I only gave you a little help. The rest was all you." Word of the public acknowledgement quickly spread through the town. People who had doubted Miss Benson began to see her in a new light. The crazy schoolmarm was now recognized as wise, compassionate, and courageous. Her willingness to act on her convictions, even when faced with skepticism and criticism, had led to meaningful change in the life of a hardworking young man. The town learned that kindness, when offered thoughtfully, could produce results far beyond what gossip or doubt could predict. Eli continued to thrive in the months that followed. He was no longer struggling to survive. He had built a foundation for a stable and independent life. The envelope from Miss Benson had been the spark, but it was his dedication, careful planning, and hard work that had truly transformed his circumstances. He repaired more equipment, expanded his work, and even began saving a little money for the future. The sense of pride he carried was quiet but deep, rooted in the knowledge that he had used the help he received wisely and responsibly. Clara, observing from her schoolhouse, felt a deep satisfaction in seeing the results of her actions. She had believed in Eli when few others had, and her belief had proven well placed. The town's gradual recognition of her wisdom was a bonus, but the true reward was witnessing the growth and transformation of someone she cared about. Her courage to act with compassion had created ripples that extended far beyond what she could have imagined, demonstrating the quiet but profound power of a single thoughtful gesture. The bond between Eli and Clara, though unspoken, was strengthened by mutual respect and trust. He continued to work diligently, inspired by her faith in him, while she continued to teach with dedication, quietly shaping the lives of the children and the broader community. Together, in different ways, they had demonstrated that kindness, courage, and thoughtful action could change not only individual lives, but also the hearts and minds of an entire town. Over time, the town's attitude shifted completely. The whispers of "crazy" were replaced with admiration for Clara's insight and compassion. People began to understand that her generosity had been deliberate, wise, and transformative. She had identified potential where others saw struggle and had offered support that allowed that potential to flourish. The lesson was clear. Acts of kindness, when guided by wisdom and trust, could create positive change far beyond what anyone might expect. Eli's journey became a quiet inspiration to the town. People began to look for opportunities to support one another, understanding that helping someone thoughtfully could empower them to achieve their goals and contribute positively to the community. Miss Benson's courage to act in spite of criticism had set an example that would resonate for years to come. The small act of giving an envelope of money had sparked a transformation in one life and had begun to shift the mindset of an entire town. By spring, the town had fully recognized the significance of what had happened. Eli was self-sufficient, confident, and respected. Miss Benson's generosity was no longer questioned but celebrated quietly by those who had witnessed its impact. The young cowboy had learned the value of trust, humility, and the careful use of support, while the town had learned that sometimes the most meaningful lessons come from unexpected acts of kindness. Eli's life continued to flourish. He maintained his work, cared for his animals, and used his growing resources to improve his living conditions further. He also made a point to help others when possible, paying forward the kindness he had received. The envelope from Miss Benson had been a small beginning, but the lessons it carried had changed his life in ways that would last forever. Miss Benson, in turn, continued to teach with dedication and compassion. Her reputation in the town had shifted from skepticism to admiration, and her actions had set an example for the children she taught. They learned not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also the importance of kindness, courage, and integrity. The ripple effects of her quiet act of generosity would continue to influence the town for years to come. Eli often reflected on the journey he had taken, from struggling cowboy to self-sufficient and respected member of the community. He remembered the exhaustion, the worry, and the feeling of being trapped by circumstances he could not control. And he remembered the envelope, the quiet gesture of faith and belief from Miss Benson that had allowed him to rise above those challenges. It was a reminder that sometimes all a person needs is a small spark of support to ignite their potential. The town, now fully convinced of Miss Benson's wisdom, saw the transformation not as an isolated event but as a lesson in humanity. Acts of kindness, courage, and thoughtful intervention had the power to change lives, challenge assumptions, and inspire others to do the same. The story of Eli Parker and the schoolmarm who believed in him became a quiet legend, a reminder that even in a world full of skepticism, a single act of generosity could create lasting change. Eli's journey was complete in a sense, but the lessons it carried were timeless. He had learned that accepting help was not a weakness, that determination combined with opportunity could overcome nearly any obstacle, and that gratitude and humility were as important as hard work. Miss Benson had learned that courage and compassion could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that were both visible and unseen. And the town had learned that judgment often comes too quickly, and that patience, observation, and understanding can reveal the wisdom in actions once thought foolish. In the end, Eli Parker was no longer a struggling cowboy. He was a man who had faced adversity, accepted help wisely, and used it to build a life of stability, independence, and quiet generosity. Miss Clara Benson, once called crazy for her act of kindness, had been proven right, her judgment and compassion vindicated. Together, they had demonstrated the profound impact that trust, kindness, and thoughtful action could have on a person, a community, and a future filled with promise. The story of the schoolmarm and the cowboy became a tale of hope and inspiration, a testament to the power of believing in others, the value of compassion, and the quiet strength that comes from doing what is right, even when others doubt you. And as Eli looked out across the snow-covered plains, he knew that the gift he had received, the belief placed in him, and the lessons learned would guide him for the rest of his life. A reminder that one small act of kindness could truly change everything.